Five, four, three, two, one. G'day, everyone. Welcome back. It's a pleasure to introduce a new guest tonight, Dr. Charles Kos. Charles is a YouTuber since 2017, increasingly trying to dismantle existing paradigms and notions he sees as false or out of date or driven by agendas now proven incorrect. Just that statement alone, mate, that's why you're here. These are many, but were often set up in revolutionary periods and do not reflect reality now that we know much more. He's written several books and finished his PhD in medieval history and literature in 2013. He's most proud of his book on pyramids, which exposes them as a worldwide earth fertility religion, which largely died out around 2000 BC in Europe, but still has holdouts today. He's travelled Europe 4 times, USA once, looking for ancient mysteries to explore. We found a few down under, mate. I'll share those with you as we go along. He's currently working on a book exposing the astronomy and mathematics behind the worldwide ancient megalithic system. We need to talk about that. As a hobby, he loves camping, especially if you can take the telescope along. He currently works at reselling items such as books on ancient mysteries on eBay, and I've got two of those books on the way, mate. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you so much, mate, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And another Aussie, mate. That's what I like about this is that we're bringing an Aussie perspective, and the where do we start? Where do we start? I think we start at medieval history. So before we hit the record button, your PhD is in medieval history, and you were chasing the origins of Robin Hood. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how did you go with that?
Well, I went okay. I initially wanted to look for the origins of the Templars and to see how they might have been devil worshippers, but the professor was against that. He said they're very good. They were very good people. They were not devil worshippers. But
Okay.
so he let me do Robin Hood instead. He didn't want me
Hmm.
to do that. So I was very happy to find a bloke called Robert. He was a
Hmm.
knight.
Hmm.
He lived in North Yorkshire, and apparently everyone knows the original part of the Robin Hood legend is from Yorkshire, not
From
Nos.
Yorkshire, yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this bloke, he went around with 50 hooded men all around England for 1 year, robbing all the priests in all the towns, throwing the money to the poor, or
Really?
selling the grain they robbed very cheaply. Yeah.
Okay.
This happened in 1231, and they finished every town before Christmas.
Really?
Showed this to the professor in Latin. He was reading it in Latin. He said, "But this is original. This is like classic Robin Hood.
Hmm.
This is incredible." And so I developed that into an honors and then a PhD,
Hmm.
and that took about seven or 8 years, but it was done
Wow.
eventually.
Wow. That's impressive. And is that something, did you bring something to light there? Because I'd never heard that until you just said that right now. Like,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
His name was Robert Thwing. He was a knight of I forget exactly where it was, but it was yeah, North Yorkshire.
Mm.
And the scenario is basically that leading up to uh, it's actually the aftermath of Magna Carta. It's nobles
Really?
don't have their rights. We're talking
Yes.
about an occupied England. England was given by King John to the Pope in exchange
Yes.
for support.
Yes. Yes. It's all
Italian
coming back to me.
nobles,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, Italian nobles came over
Mm.
and they started saying, okay, this land here, this belongs to me. This land here, that can belong to me because the Pope is my overlord through King John. And the
Right.
English nobles said, what about us? And lots of their lands were taken over, including part of the lands of this Robert, this knight,
Okay. So that caused his insurrection. Right. Okay.
against all these Italian priests throughout England. Indeed. And
So
people don't
Robert,
know this.
that's that. That is so interesting. The fact that he's real. I mean, it's one of those eternal stories, isn't it? I mean, to this day, one of my favorite movies is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. Like every now
Okay.
and again, I roll that one out. You know what I mean? It's just an epic, and it's and I think there's those of us that want to be part of the band of merry men. Steal from the rich, give to the poor, live in the trees. You know what I mean? In the forest, and I think there's something. There's an echo there that I think some of us feel. And I had no idea that there was proof that it was actually real and it was against the Italian priest. It makes sense. It makes sense if you think about it. It's not. And that's where the story comes from. That's the legend. Wow.
That's indeed it. Like we saw it in Latin in the original text. It said Robert was he was this was added into a marginal note
Hmm.
in I think the 1250s into a 1230 text that he was said sic palliatum. A pallium is a monk's hood. In
Hmm.
other words, the bloke was saying he's wearing a hood.
He
He
was
was
a
hooded.
hooded man. He was a Robin Hood,
He was Robert. He was hooded, and he even added he was a handsome young man. His men followed every instruction. So there's a legend there.
the band of merry men who would lay down their lives for Robin. That is so interesting. That is so interesting. So I wonder, in your studies, you would have had to look at the Dark Ages because the modern story and the modern narrative is nothing happened in the Dark Ages. I don't believe that for a second. However, did your studies take you there? Have you looked there or?
Um, Not with those studies. The problem with the Dark Ages is, and actually the early Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, is there is no voice of the common man or the peasant
Mm,
at all, period.
mm, okay.
Even in this period that I'm looking at, the 1230s, there is no voice surviving of the common man. That
So
only begins around 1500 with books.
really, so these texts that you're doing is that would be priests writing the texts as well, because that they would be one of the only ones that would be recording anything that was going on. Is that correct?
That's correct. I got this information from a monk of St. Albans, Matthew Paris, and he
Hmm.
wrote all this down while it was happening,
Right. Oh, so he was there. He wrote it down as it was going on.
a contemporary.
And I've got to ask, how did you find that text? Because I mean, you've just like I feel like we're revealing something tonight. Like we know who Robin Hood is. Like that must have been a bit of an adventure itself. Talk to us about how you actually came across that text. Obviously, you can read Latin. Is that correct? As you or you
No, we can pretend to read Latin.
we can
Every
pretend?
medieval
Yes.
scholar is basically pretending to read Latin
Mm-hmm.
because it takes about 20 years to really learn it.
Mm-hmm.
And every monk, every monastery had their own type of Latin, their own vocabulary. So you can learn one,
Really?
another one's different.
Okay.
How did I find the text? I had to read every book on Robin Hood,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to break the paradigm. The
Mm.
paradigm said Robin must be a yeoman. A
Right.
yeoman is an early middle class peasant farmer who owns a bit of land.
Mm-hmm.
They said Robin Hood has to be a yeoman. And a bloke called Holt, historian from
Mm.
England, he wrote a really good book on Robin Hood, and he found a peasant called Robert Hod. He said Robert Hod seems to have been part of may have been part of Robert Thwing's movement of robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. And I thought, well, hang on a sec, forget about Robert Hod.
Mm.
Let's look at Robert Thwing, the knight,
Yeah.
running this
Who's
thing, the leader.
yeah. Yeah.
And people thought, well, he can't be him because he's a yeoman. And my professor actually found the medieval definition of yeoman, instead of the late medieval definition, which is early middle class, the
Mm.
medieval high Middle Ages definition is someone who works for the king,
Right.
cavalry.
Yes. Okay. Right.
And
W-
all the scholars just ignore this.
Is it what? I mean, look, I've got 1,000 questions. Did you find the same sort of pushback trying to undo the paradigm of Robin Hood? Is that we all do, trying to explore these mysteries and all that sort of stuff? Because there is a narrative, there is an accepted paradigm within the system that must be adhered to. I suppose is that something you came up against, or?
Yes, like it took a while to get the PhD through. One of the professors was a bit of a socialist, and she was saying, I need to write more about how the rich were, smiting the poor and oppressing the poor, and how this
Oh,
evolved and developed the legend. And I thought, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. And my professor kind of supported me on that. So, eventually, a bit argy-bargy, and we got it through. But, it's a PhD is about actually changing the paradigm.
hmm,
And this is the thing that most people don't know. They want it. They support all these academics. If you want to do a PhD, you have to discover something new.
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
discovery.
Mm. I mean, become one of the things that we've said here a couple of times, and is that I've got my 10,000 hours looking into these ancient mysteries. No, I didn't attend a university to do so. However, I've done my time and I've read these papers and I've read this stuff. And then you start digging into the source material that comes from these papers that are like 2,000, 3,000 words. And the source material is a couple of hundred words. It's like, how did you take 300 words and turn it into 3,000? That these two things don't go together. And as you say, it's people rehashing or giving another perspective to push their narrative, or you know what I mean? It's an interesting thing.
That's quite true. Um, I will add that it's very easy once you get started to just keep writing and writing and writing, and eventually you got to cut it down. And that's the hard bit, really,
Yeah.
for me anyway. Cutting it down. Wow, you get rid of some of your research and
So how long was the PhD paper that you wrote on Robin Hood? What
100,000 words.
it's got to be 100,000 words. That's the wow. Because the average book's like 20,000, isn't it? Or is it?
I think books start around that's low for a book. I think it's more like 30, 40 for
Okay.
a lower end a shorter book, and then
Mm.
and some of these novels might be, they're so
Yeah,
thick they
it's
might be
so thick. Yeah.
150,000 literally,
Mm.
like these days.
So have you released that? I mean, I know you're a writer and you're a researcher. Have you should release a book on that. I've, you know, when you said Robin Hood, like that's of the grand old myths and all that sort of stuff. For me as a kid, like that was one of them. It's like running around with a bow in the bush, and you know what I mean. Like there's something definitely that echoes through to today. But you should do a book on that because I feel like again, I study a lot of this stuff, and I didn't know that you'd actually found him, and that's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to head in that direction, and the professor wanted me to, but I actually got so tired of the academic world and all that, so
Mm,
I just needed a big break from it. And then, one year becomes two or three or four, and then we find ourselves here. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, look, mate, you got my vote if you ever want to pick it back up and put it into a book because I think that's very cool. So, what led you to the ancient advanced civilization or the megalithic civilization? What was your, everyone has their moment. Is it something you've been looked at since you were a kid, or is it something you picked up later, or where did you start in this grand old mystery that we're all so involved in now?
Well, I started with looking at Stonehenge, and for some reason, I was really, really interested in it as a little kid.
Mm,
So I'd go to the library, I'd look up all the books I could. I wish I could go to the other libraries where I saw in the computer catalog they had other copies about Stonehenge books. And eventually, I read so much about this, and I realized, you know what? They don't know anything about these people. They just assume they were more primitive than we can imagine,
hmm.
and they sort of built this thing by accident because they were savage brutes.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, look, my background, just so you understand, Charles, is in logistics. I was a logistics specialist at a project management level in oil and gas and mining and all that sort of stuff. My job is to know how to move weird and wonderful things from one place to the next. And you don't build Stonehenge by accident. And you know what I mean? Like, there's no way that and then they just drag the rocks across the grass, or it's like, really, did that really? I mean, you could. I'm not saying you can't. That's the Stonehenge stones aren't that big. They're not that small either, though, Charles, are they? Like it's yeah, it's that's a fascinating one, especially with the lidar stuff that's come out recently. How it's actually three times as large as they originally thought as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
indeed.
So where did you go with Stonehenge? And how old were you when you got? I'm curious.
Oh, I was like 8 or 7 or 8 or 9.
Yeah,
I started looking up Britannica, right? And
yeah.
and I noticed every article I looked up, usually on the Beaker people, it always told me to see another article. And then the other article never gave the answers anyway. It would
You never
refer
sees
back to the
anything. Yeah.
first article.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. So I
So
got
that
nowhere.
so you just said the Beaker people. So is that the official on who thinks built Stonehenge?
It's a traditional view. They say this Beaker people arrived from continental Europe. Then they say a more advanced form of the Beaker people in that Stonehenge area were known as the Wessex culture. This is
Mm,
what they were saying in the 50s, and these people They also had some metal working. There's some metal gold working survives,
Hmm.
and they say, oh, these must be the Stonehenge builders, and that's the most advanced. That Wessex culture is just around the Stonehenge area, so they
Mm.
think, okay, it's not a national thing over the whole island. It's just in that area.
Just in that area. So those people were advanced enough to, well, that's how they've joined the dots. They think that those people were advanced enough to build it, so then they give it to them. Is that?
Pretty much, pretty much.
Mm.
But you know what? There's always been hints at something else because they look at they since the 50s and 40s, they've looked at the link between Stonehenge and the Mycenaean culture, the mortise and tenons that
Hmm.
they found. And I've noticed the same thing in China. In China, the royal sanctified buildings were the only ones allowed to be built in a similar way to Stonehenge,
Mm.
circular buildings. So even back then, in the 50s and 60s, people were saying, hang on a sec, this is like so much. It's like the Serapeum as well in Egypt. This
Mm.
is like so much we see in different countries.
Mm. It's the echoes, isn't it? I think, we I pretty much chase echoes. It's like I see it's like, okay, here's an echo here, here's an echo there, here's an echo here. And it is a truly global civilization. That this is it, I've got one of my presentations, and my listeners don't want me to do it again because I've done it half a dozen times, but it's like all them countries that have known megalithic sites, and it's easier just to say all of them, pretty much. And I think the ones that don't have any, we haven't found them yet. And that includes Australia as well, by the way. However, it's Stonehenge is, I think everyone either starts with Stonehenge or the Great Pyramid of Giza. I think they're the two, as kids, they're the two that grab our attention. And I think, look, I was just, while you were talking about, was mine Stonehenge first or was it the Great Pyramid first? And I think it might have been a pretty close run race, And as I say, I mean, I grew up in Ballarat, so it's cold and terrible and miserable in Ballarat most of the time. So I spent my time in the library as well, searching through books and the Greek Encyclopedia Britannica. That's why I smiled when you said, I'm like, yeah, man, I did that. I did that. Like going through, trying to read everything about it. Where is it from? What's it doing? I didn't. I just heard you say Mycenaean culture. So we explain Mycenaean for us.
Well, the Mycenaean, it's a
Mycenaean.
modern
Okay.
name
Yeah.
for the people who in the Iliad seem to be called the Achaeans or the Aegeans.
Hmm.
Now,
It's a
Mycenae,
seafaring culture.
exactly, it's a
Hmm.
seafaring culture.
Hmm.
It was the capital. We think it was the capital because the main king was there.
Hmm.
Many of the stories seem to be from there, and they had the biggest amount of troops and ships in the catalogue of the ships in the Iliad.
Hmm.
So they call it the Mycenaean culture. But back then, what was it called? We don't really know.
We
My
don't
guess
know.
is Achaean based on what the Iliad says, but who really
Yeah.
knows?
Who really knows? I mean, and the thing is, there is this echo as well. We talk about echoes of the Egyptians fought a seafaring culture for a long time. Like every now and again, this seafaring culture would rock up to Egypt, try and take everything. And there's stories in hieroglyphs that the sea people was basically what they say in the hieroglyphs. They fought these sea people every now and again until they finally pushed them off. Well, that's the story. You know, when we come into talking about seafaring people, I think we don't understand and we don't know how long we actually have been navigating the seas. Like I think there's multiple ancient cultures that have just slipped through the sands of time that, yeah, we don't know um, where they're from or who they were. And as you say, who are the Mycenaeans? That's a good guess. Are they from the Mediterranean? Were they originally from the Mediterranean, or did they originate in the Middle East? Did they, like? And if this is a truly global culture that echoes around the globe with standing stones, circular stuff, the astronomy, right, the mapping of the stars, the solstices, the equinoxes, it's not just to plough the fields. I don't believe that for a second. I think it helps, right? When you understand the cycle of the stars, definitely helps when to know how to plant your fields and all that sort of stuff. However, it's not just that. I mean, when we talk about seafaring situations, or seafaring cultures. Where have your studies led you on that with the Mycenaeans or the Aegeans, or where do we go?
Well, people have always held that the Stonehenges were never a seafaring culture, but what I've been seeing recently is that the very name Celt may be from Chaldean.
Really?
It is, yeah, it is written in the early British chronicles, which survived from the Renaissance, that there was a Chaldean migration in maybe 1600 or 2000 BC to Britain. And
Mm,
there's an entire movement based on this idea called British Israelism, that the British people are part lost tribes of Israel.
really?
Yeah, it's a huge movement in the 19th century. Look up the Wikipedia article, British Israelism, massive, massive books written on it, massive amounts of evidence.
And what time frame are we talking here? So when are we slotting this into the supposed timeline?
We're talking maybe I'd say 3000 to 2000 BC. In other words, these lost tribes are the megalithic builders.
Do you think it was that early?
Yeah, and that's when Stonehenge and Giza were built, I think, by the same people.
Yeah, right. So you subscribe to the pyramid being built about 4,500 years ago.
Some of it,
So some of
at
it.
least
Okay.
the outer part. I have a theory that Khufu's dynasty went around flattening all the pyramids, in other words, paving them, straightening out the sides.
Yeah, putting the capstones on them. Yeah, doing the limestone. Yeah, yeah.
Because Snefru, was it Snefru the first one? He did three pyramids. You
Mm.
can't build three pyramids in one generation and then build barely a small pyramid in a generation for the rest of Egyptian history.
Yeah. I mean,
I think,
the
yeah.
problem with Egypt, and I think the problem with a lot of these cultures is the deeper we dig, mate, the better it gets, and it should be the other way around. Like so, it's like as we get closer to our time, the worse quality of the megalithic building is. Like I think so. Yeah, that's curious. So you think maybe what a step pyramid was there, or do you thinking they just lined the outside? Because isn't it? It's said to be one was red, one was white, one was black. Is that correct? I think it was like the one or the Great Pyramid was white because it shone across the desert. That was isn't that Plato? It was not Plato. Is it Plato that you could see the Great Pyramid from across the world basically because it refracted.
It was certainly some later Greek who said that. I think
Mm,
from memory it was the two were white and the Menkaure pyramid was colored.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think the one. Yeah, they did. They've never had coloured. I mean, so I haven't had the privilege to go over to Egypt yet. I had plans in 2021, but that didn't happen, right? Um, and I'm recovering from lost resources. I will get over there. I have a vision of me standing in front of the pyramids, so I need to get over there. Um, but you've obviously stood in front of the Great Pyramid. No, you haven't been either.
No, I've never been there. Um,
Ah, okay.
I've been so busy traveling to other places that I haven't been there because there's so much to see even in
This
Europe.
is the problem, isn't it? And I think I heard an interesting was talking to some people, and it's like the problem is with the upswell of interest in these ancient advanced cultures. A lot of these places are now tourist destinations as well. So it's like some of the majesty has gone from them a little bit, and maybe we need to try and find new stuff, like discovering who Robin Hood was. You know what I mean? That's and so what? So you've been to Stonehenge. What's Stonehenge like?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. There's a lot of English heritage guards around keeping you far away from it, but it's bigger than I thought. So when you approach it
Mm,
by bus,
mhm.
like I thought, what's that ruin? It looks like a ruin of Stalingrad, like a bombed out building or something. What's that doing there? Oh, it's Stonehenge. It's almost like a concrete color.
Mm.
I think partly because it's supposed to be a sort of lunar color, like it's unhewn because it's supposed to be lunar craters, possibly to
Okay.
worship this lunar god, but
Yeah.
it's another thing. But yeah,
Oh, we
it's
can get to that.
beautiful. The trilithons, the big ones, they're about five of us in height.
Really?
Yep, bigger than I thought.
That is bigger than I thought. I must
Yeah,
have looked at 1,000 photos online. You know what I mean? I've got photos in my research folders. I wouldn't have said they were that big. They're really that big.
they're really that big?
Well, then no, they didn't just drag them across the hills. Then, if they're that big,
No.
how do you stand something like that up with copper chisels? You know what I mean? Like that's wow. Now with Stonehenge though, there's that classic set of photos of them rebuilding it in the 50s or 60s or something like that, putting it back together. How do we know they did that properly? And is that the echo we see now, or
Well, they didn't do it properly because they were changing it. They were trying to restore it
mm,
back to what they thought was original. In the 19th century, I'd say it was more romantic looking because the stones were all at weird angles, and you see this in the old paintings.
mm,
Now, there's a big problem with what happened in the 50s as well. It is a fact that most archaeologists, I'd say, I think from memory, the figure is about a half conduct excavations without ever publishing the results. And this happened in the 50s. With
right,
Stonehenge, Atkinson never got around. He called these Stonehenges howling barbarians, but he never got around to publishing his results. He was one of the people who did the restoration work between, I think it was done between the 30s and the 50s.
mm.
So we don't know too much since he never published it. And maybe some of the others have been published, but I'm not sure about that either.
Yeah, right. We can't find that anywhere. It's just gone to it's into the ether and never to be seen again.
Uh, I'm not sure. His papers might survive somewhere. Robert Temple, I know he buys up the papers of old archaeologists, and he can see, he looks up original pictures that they've taken of the Sphinx or whatever.
Mm.
Somewhere they might survive somewhere. But apparently, lots of museums, universities don't even want the old papers or old books of their old professors. They just chuck them out. Lots have been lost in this way.
Wow. And isn't that, it's like, sometimes we think there's some nefarious plot to keep this knowledge from us. And no, it's just the janitor threw it out when he died. That's it. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no nefarious plot. It's like that was the end of his tenure and they threw it away. But it's what I find fascinating is that a lot of I've sort of zero focused in on Australia, and because when I started looking in, once I got over the Majesty and Pumpunku and all the go through all the massive megalithic sites, you go, wow, look at that, that's crazy. Then I thought about it logistically. Then I stood back and went, hang on a minute, there's a very big Australia-sized hole in this megalithic puzzle. And I think, have you heard about Australia's Stonehenge that existed in Mullumbimby up until the 40s?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually know Richard Patterson. He was the one that discovered, in a similar fashion, the documents by Frederick Slater in the back of a Mullumbimby drawer in the Mullumbimby Historical Society. And it's a crazy story, that one. So with Stonehenge, did they fix it or did they change it or we don't know because we don't know what it originally looked like. There's no photos that survive to today of it's just those paintings. I know the ones you're talking about. They're all sort of leaned over and all that sort of stuff.
Um, what they've done is they've uprighted the stones. A
Mm,
lot of the stones have been uprighted. However, the plans of what they call the original Stonehenge actually don't match the monument. For example, they call the Sarzens, which circle the Trilithons, they call this the Sarsen Circle.
mm.
And I've got evidence. This never was a circle, it was a crescent.
Really?
The crescent was worshipped in ancient times, not the circle. Yeah, there's some stones missing along one side.
Hmm.
And what it actually looks like is two jaws coming together, the trilithon jaw, the
Yep.
smaller jaw, and the
Yep.
big jaw.
Yep.
It means there's a rainbow serpent circling the earth, meeting at Stonehenge.
Ooh.
Yeah, so one of those is not a circle, it's just another jaw, a horseshoe. And because there's absent stones there, but they show on all the maps that there would have been stones there in the old days. There's no evidence for that.
And this is the reason I asked you because it's like when I saw how it had been rebuilt, it's like, well, how do we know they rebuilt it correctly? obviously they got some of the alignments correct, but again, how did they do that? Like, I mean, that's an interesting thing. Or did the solstice alignment stones survive in their current form? They only sort of, it was only the trilithon, the big ones on top that have fallen over.
I think that one was the heel stone's always been at a funny angle. I'm not quite sure about that one.
Mm,
I think they might have actually moved that one as well a little bit
mm,
because I think they wanted to look under the stones, so they actually moved them all out of the way with their cranes.
yeah.
They dug under them, I believe, and they
What
sort
did
of
they
put back,
find under there? I wonder. We don't know.
antlers and bits of antler, and that they say they would have dug with bits of bone.
Mm.
They found a
Oh,
better
so
looking,
so that's how they dug the hole. That's how they placed the stones by digging with antlers.
possibly.
Yeah, well, that only would really.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. You can't dig with antlers.
Well, look, you can scratch around, I suppose, but is that what you're going to use to place your 50-ton blocks that are 10 meters high? Oh, just use the antlers to scratch it, scratch a spot in the dirt. So how do they say what's the modern narrative? How do they say they actually shape them, cut them?
Oh, they use stone mauls.
Oh, so like the
They-
like
well,
the like the diorite balls in Egypt. Yeah, good. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
they said they dressed them with that, and then they cut them by splitting the rock with the fire along straight lines,
Mm.
and maybe some wedges, wooden wedges, swell with water. But these are guesses.
Yeah.
However, I have seen evidence of this on top of one of the trilthons when I was there. I
Hmm.
actually saw what looked like a straight line. Holes had been drilled or something where you could have put the wedges in, but for some reason they stopped and they didn't do that stone. So you can still see that pattern on top of one of the trilithons where they would have cut the stones in that way. So yeah, I guess they could have done that.
But how are they drilling the holes with what with a
I don't know. And
mm.
thing is, the plot thickens.
Right?
The plot thickens because
Yeah.
these stones, they call it a natural concrete.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
the Sarzens,
What
natural concrete.
what type of stone is most of Stonehenge? Do we know what type of stone it is? Is it a limestone? Is it a
They call it Sarsen stone after the local area because the area was called Sarsbury or Salisbury, and there
yeah,
was
yeah.
Old Sarum not too far off. Uh,
Okay.
they also say it's named after the Saracens because maybe, and this sort of fits the legend that the giants from Africa built this. In other
Yep.
words, there's a very old legend.
Yep.
International people came and did this.
Yes. Yes.
You
Well, I mean,
see?
this is I think I was following Hugh Newman and I can't what is it Mike Collins? Is it I know they did it. They did a giant book recently anyway. And they went into that basically going, well, everyone says there's giants and we're going to prove that there's not. And now I think they're still researching it and they've released one book proving that, that it's potentially true. It's like, all these things we dig into, it's but we're not going to get past natural concrete. So you think they were molded, maybe, or we don't know. We're just guessing.
I'd say we're still guessing.
Mm-hmm.
They people say it's a natural concrete which happens to be local to the area. I think it's still all guesswork.
Mm. But some of those stones they've said came from Scotland, don't they? Like there's not just the stones that are local. Isn't there some stone that's come from over 40 miles away or 400 miles away? Some of those stones, is that correct?
Yeah, so for a long time they've been saying the bluestones come from Wales.
Wales, that's what I was. Yep, yep.
Now there is an ancient legend that the whole thing comes from Ireland, from Killamis uh, mountain in Ireland. It was on top of a mountain.
Okay.
Makes us think of Newgrange, which is also on a mountain.
Hmm.
The stone they have been saying comes from Scotland is the altar stone, which is so there's three colors there. There's the grey stones, the sarsens. There's the blue stones,
Hmm.
and then there's this sort of white grey stone, which is the altar stone. There might have been two,
Yeah.
and they say this one comes from Scotland. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
I mean, and
But
when they say that, do they know they have an idea where the quarry is? Like, it's like, or they just say that's a stone that is in Scotland. It must have come from there, sort of thing.
I think they. I don't know if they have a quarry. They do have a supposed quarry for the bluestones in Wales.
Mm.
As for the one in Scotland, I don't know enough about it. They may or they may not.
Yeah,
But I
fair
would
enough.
say, both discoveries kind of point to the fact that these people were seafaring.
Mm. Well, how are you transporting stones of that size? I mean, how are you even moving stones of that size up a hill? Like there's a story out of South America where another race basically found Pumapunku, right? And in reverence to the gods, they decided, and they found, because the other thing about some of these sites, as you probably know, is that they find unfinished stuff, right? It's like they walked away from the job, right? And there's the same in South America. There's megalithic blocks that are at the bottom of hills and stuff like that are just there. Um, and the story goes that in reference to the gods, in reverence of the gods who built the stone, we're going to drag this stone up to the top and we're going to set it in place. That's what we're going to do. And the story goes that thousands of men tried to pull it up the slope or push and pull it. Long story short, the rope snapped and it killed like 1,500 of them, just rolled down, just mowing people down. So it's like when they say from a logistical perspective, oh, it's just manpower. Well, yeah. In what form though? Like, are we using, because you need on using a crane, you've got your ropes that allows you to your multiple pulleys, which allows you to lift more with less. Now, as far as we understand it, I'm pretty sure that was a Roman invention. Or invention is a loose term as well, Charles. I think. I think a lot of these ancient societies found things. I don't think they created them. I think they found them or they found records of them. Um, However, yeah, I mean, it's before we're opening up into several rabbit holes. I want to ask a question. The scoop marks, when I say scoop marks, you know what I mean, right? With the like the is I've seen scoop marks supposedly on those stones at Stonehenge. Is that have you seen some of that, or did you see that when you were there?
Uh, can't remember, but I was there in 2012. But I believe I have seen pictures of those scoop marks on
Yeah,
Stonehenge as well.
yeah, yeah. What I wonder, and I don't know whether anyone's done this, has anyone measured the scoop marks at the unfinished obelisk, the scoop marks in South America, and the scoop marks on Stonehenge? And I wonder whether they are of a similar width. And if they are of a similar width, then that lends to a tool of some kind, some sort of standardized tool. So, I mean, concrete. So they call it concrete. But again, you still got to drill into it. So it means you need a harder, because I know what you're saying. You do the lines and you feed the fire into the things, and that causes a crack down the middle, and then you can dress the stone with something that's harder than that stone in a primitive fashion. Can be done, can be replicated. But how are they drilling into it? Or what kind of, you know what I mean? Like that's without, because what age are we talking here? It's not the Bronze Age, the Copper Age. Like this is ancient. They don't have any metal at that stage. What's the common narrative when Stonehenge was actually built?
Stonehenge is around 2000, starts around 2300, goes down to 1800 with all the rebuilding. So it's Bronze Age.
Bronze Age. Okay.
Pyramids are a bit earlier, Copper Age, apparently.
Copper. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Copper diorite balls and copper chisels. Because you can move a 70-ton lintel stone with copper chisels and diorite balls. Of course you can. Uh, so from an astronomical perspective, which is, and obviously don't give away too much of your new book that's coming out. Um, what's your what have you found at Stonehenge that we may not know about, or is there anything you can share there?
Oh, lots, lots. So in the 19th century, the discoverer of ley lines, I'm not talking the bloke in the 20th century, I'm talking a bloke called Edward Duke.
Hmm.
He lived at the house now occupied by Sting, the singer.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Beautiful house called Lake House. Huge mansion, very old. He went around with a buddy, digging up all these old graves, all these old mounds. They wrote a book about it. But he noticed a north-south alignment. You head due north from Stonehenge, you hit Avebury. In between, there's Silbury Hill. There's a north-south alignment going all the way up and down England, right to the top. And I've made a video where I've got one of the Ordnance Survey maps, which actually shows the ancient sites, and it crosses one hill after another, after natural scenery, after stone circle, again, all the way up from north to south.
And they all line up, don't they? It's like it's a direct line. I've seen that. I've seen that.
And
Yep.
and then I thought, okay, let's subdivide. Let's check if this is subdividing the area of the land. And there's approximately equal area with Google Maps on both sides of Britain of this line.
Really?
Someone else suggested to me this line, that line, another one there, British flag. So English flag actually shows the partitioning of the land, the crossing of the land into quadrants by land area from this location. So they knew the land area. How do I know this? Julius Caesar talks about how the Druids are always babbling about the size of the Earth. They spend all day talking about measuring the planet.
Mm.
So these people are doing this, and we know into the pyramid as well, the Great Pyramid, full of dimensions of the Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I Well, and I'd never thought about the British cross. I mean, where does that British cross come from? That's a good question, right? Is that an echo in itself, potentially?
Many of the aspects of Christianity, I think, were already there before
Mm,
Jesus.
mm. I
Uh,
was more talking about the flag, as you said, like the flag like that. It's like I'd never thought about where that symbol actually comes from. And it might be a representation of what you're talking about, the ley lines that exist
yes,
on
because the
Britain.
nation is represented by the cross.
Yeah.
So the land is as well, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, and this is what I was talking about before, echoes. It's like, I had a thought actually. No, we'll get to Egypt later. I had a thought. I wanted to share with you. So, as far as the henges are concerned, you spent some time over there. You've seen Stonehenge. Did you go to Avebury? You went on a bit of a megalithic hunt. How do they reflect Stonehenge? And is that what sort of led you to believe that they're not put together properly, like they're the two half circles? Have they tried to restore other ones to make them look similar, or?
So Avebury was after William Stuckley found it and started documenting it and drawing it. It was mostly demolished by the local people as a kind of quarry.
Mm,
In the 19th century, early 20th century, someone went around marking where the stones were with a kind of concrete bollards. So you can actually see you'll see three concrete bollards and then an original stone. And then another
right.
three bollards or two bollards, and that's Avebury, but most of it is still gone. There were two serpentine pathways coming into the circle, so showing two snakes came through. Uh,
Mhm.
there was a bloke who wrote about this back in the 70s. Oh, I forget the name,
That's okay.
uh, but yeah, I mean, massive. Avebury's massive, and massive ramparts around it as well. Um,
Really? So,
yeah.
so is that a? Are we talking mound building culture as well? Do you think, or is that? Mm,
Yes, the mounds were built for similar reasons to the pyramids being built. They
mm.
instead of stone, you can use soil. I found similar traits with Silbury Hill. It measures the size of the earth. Same with Stonehenge. Stonehenge and Avebury, I've been finding measures the size, not only the size of the earth, but also the speed of the earth through space and all sorts of things. Because these
Wow.
people, imagine a very clever people, nothing to do all day, no internet. They're looking at the heavens. That's their
Mm.
entertainment.
Do you subscribe that they are the survivors of the Great Cataclysm 13,000 years ago?
Oh, that's a dicey one. Well, the problem is this: there's been so many cataclysms,
That is
uh,
true. That is true.
and it looks like they happen very regularly.
Mm. And we're
And
overdue, but that's neither here nor there.
yeah, I believe our millennial system, which the Mayans had as well, because
Yes.
their 2012 lines up pretty much with the end of our millennium.
Mm.
So both the old world and the new world are using a similar system because we've had contact in the past. This is actually based on this cycle of cataclysms.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think, uh, look, let's leave the timeline alone because you are totally right about cataclysms, mini ice ages, they happen semi regularly, super volcanoes. And I think the timeline itself is something that needs to be discussed. I've wondered about what cataclysm does to carbon dating as well. So does that throw our timelines out? Um, do you so that, again, let's leave timelines alone. Do you think that we've reached an advanced level multiple times and then been brought back to Earth? Pardon the pun.
Yes.
Mm, I agree. I agree. But I mean, so we talk about cataclysms. The two major ones that I'm aware of, 70 odd thousand years ago, which was the Sumatran volcano, which brought us the human race supposedly down to under 10,000 people, 5,000, depending on which paper you read on that. Uh, and then 13,000 years ago, which is, the sea level rose 400 foot across the world. But throughout that as well, we started talking about the mini ice age that accelerated the fall of the Roman Empire, which was about 1,000 years ago or so, or 2,000 years ago. Um, they happen semi regularly, but also I think they happen because the planet is so big, they can happen locally as well. Like advanced seafaring civilizations might get wiped out by their own volcano, and we never even knew they existed. Like, and and I've often wondered as well, like when we see all the old maps, it's like, well, who did that? Like it's like, how do we? Whose map is it? Is it a copy of a copy, or like you got the Piri Reis map? There's a book that I need that's like the ancient maps of the world that I want to try and find a copy of, because I'd like to see that. You know, so you keep teasing us with like a seafaring global culture. Do you think there's an origin point for this seafaring global culture, or
Oh, it's hard to find the origin because
mm,
I'll give you an example. I was in
okay,
the museum in Dublin, Ireland, the capital,
mm,
the National Museum. There's this gold jewelry there. They say 3,500 BC.
that's 5,500 years ago.
I was
Okay,
with a
yeah,
friend. She said, it looks Inca or Mayan. And she was from South America.
mm,
So we have this contact going to America from maybe that era. Maybe every generation has always gone between Europe and America.
mm,
What's the origin? I don't know. They're saying the clovers come from Europe. And that's what, 9,000 BC.
mm,
It's hard to find the it's like I think we've always known about it
mm.
at a certain level of society. You get high enough, they'll say, "Oh, there's a country over there called America. You can sail there if you want, but it's going to be expensive."
Yeah, we know it's there. Here's the maps, or and the Clovis thing's interesting as well because they kept digging at the Clovis site, the original Clovis site, and they found more evidence that is older again. That dates back past the last the 13,000 year marker, right?
Oh,
It's and again, the deeper we dig, we have a saying around here, Charles: a good spot's a good spot, mate. You know what I mean? Like, well, you're a camper. Good spot's a good spot, mate. What's the
yeah.
chances when you go camping, you find a good spot? Chances are someone else has found that good spot, and I think a good spot's a good spot. So, and you talked a little bit about uh, in South America, some of these pyramids are like Russian nesting dolls, aren't they? It's like originally it was a mound, then it was a smaller pyramid, then it was a larger pyramid, then it was a large, you know what I mean? They're like Russian nesting dolls because a good spot is a good spot. And, these spots were sacred. I mean, you mentioned the Catholic Church earlier. How many of the Catholic churches across Europe are built on standing stone places? Like that's the conquering army, isn't it? We build our deity on top of where your deity's from. That's why they knock it over. That's why they do that. That's why they do this. You know. So do you think it was a truly the evidence that you're seeing through multiple lines is that of a truly global seafaring race that touched every country, every continent, shared their knowledge, shared their mathematics, shared their, where is that sort of what you're thinking?
Yes, it was worldwide. It was partly spread through, you could call them proto-monks.
Hmm.
And I would say the whole, you see their relics in the monastic religion. Both Asia and Europe have kind of similar looking monks who shave their heads, dress up in certain colors or not, live
Yeah,
high
that's
up
true.
in
That's true.
monasteries.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you see some of these remnants of monasteries on the mountains of Peru. Lots of these things that they call fortresses are actually ancient monasteries for the elite.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. So if you, so proto monks, that's fascinating. Because again, after a while, you get over the big shiny stones, right? And it's like, okay, now for me personally, I start thinking about things logistically, but then through logistics comes mathematics, comes geology, comes trigonometry, comes like you don't just do this stuff. There is so many levels you need to get to as a society before you can even begin to contemplate building any of these things out of stone. I mean, you talk about the monasteries up on the mountaintops in Europe and stuff like that. That's an insane undertaking that you need so much skill and so much base level knowledge before you even attempt it. Is the base level knowledge an echo from another time? Is that it's passed down, continually passed down?
It is.
It is.
It is, and one of the relics is the imperial system. We see imperial units. This is the measurement system used at Stonehenge and at Giza.
So imperial in feet, inches, that sort of stuff.
More than that, there were more units. There was
Okay.
the rod, there was the chain, especially these two units. These units were used, I see them everywhere. And every time you encounter a megalithic monument, you will see rods and chains. And they're quite long units. So we imagine a rod is or maybe about 5 meters long or so. I forget the exact measure, but
That's okay.
you see, like one of the things I found, the King's Chamber. Uh, the floor is it's actually literally two rods by one rod in diameter. But everyone says,
Really?
oh, it's they talk about an inexact amount of feet. They're always banging on about feet.
Mm.
There were so many more units. Another unit that was used, 100 weight. We
Yeah,
don't we
100 weight.
don't
Yep.
we
Yeah.
don't talk about that anymore. I found that so many of these make better sense in 100 weight than in tons. Today we only talk about tons.
Well,
100 weight is a much
tons
better
is,
unit.
or it depends on which way you look at it. There is a ton that's imperial, isn't there? There's an imperial ton and a metric ton. They're two separate things. So if you took those units of measurement and you've started playing with them all over the different megalithic sites and you're seeing echoes, interesting. Very,
Exactly. Even in Australia, Mullumbimby, there's a small mound at Mullumbimby that you mentioned
yes, there
earlier. This
is.
is
Yes, there is. Yeah.
and this smaller mound, I showed Evan Strong, Steve Strong. I just applied rods to it. It makes good sense. That might be a model of the Earth. I believe all these pyramids and actually people have said for a long time that these pyramids represent the Earth, or at least half of the Earth
Half
hemisphere.
of the Earth, a hemisphere.
Yeah, and if the whole Earth I believe the number 666 was used to describe the whole Earth, Earth worship,
Mm-hmm.
which means half of that is what, 33? The
Mm-hmm.
Mason's number.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they're talking about
33.3.
pyramids, hemispheres.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And this is the mathematical echoes that we see. What I find fascinating as well, Charles, is that, and it's definitely something that our generation has observed because we grew up analog. but we've come into digital and now we're into the computer age. As our technology has advanced, our ability to read and understand these monuments has deepened, but we wouldn't understand that, we wouldn't be able to read it without that level of technology. You see what I mean? So it's like, I wonder, as you say, these proto monks have put this stuff, embedded it in all sorts of things all over the planet. And it's like, it's almost like a puzzle. So, well, when you get smart enough, you'll be able to figure it out, you know? And they did it over and over and over and over again. And I wonder how many times they did it as well. That's an interesting thing. Like, how many different versions of civilization, if we are to say that cataclysm happens regularly, which it does in the grand scheme of things, they're going to come back and do it again. I wonder and I worry. And one of the reasons I do this show is like, who's going to do it this time? You know, like, who's going to embed it, or have they already done that? I mean, there's into some interesting stuff about the Hoover Dam. I don't know if you've looked into the Hoover Dam and its alignment and all those sorts of things. There's potentially lessons that have been learnt that have been put into the Hoover Dam by the Masons as well.
Wow. But one of
Mm.
the things I'm understanding the last few days is that Masons saw themselves as taking the numbers of the universe and putting them into buildings. And in ancient parlance, that's what happened at Stonehenge and the pyramids. They took the numbers of the world, put them into those monuments.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a
And
connection.
there's absolutely a connection. I also seem to, and I want to, it's interesting that you keep mentioning the serpent. I was just having a discussion today with someone, and we're talking about the calendar. And it's like, well, the calendar should be 13 months, and there's a star sign missing, and that star sign that's missing is Ophiuchus, and Ophiuchus is the serpent, right? And because the lunar cycle is 13 moons a year. So it should be 13 months of 28 days. That's actually the lunar cycle. And there's a missing astronomical sign, and that's Ophiuchus, and it's the serpent. And the serpent, as you know, and as you keep mentioning, echoes everywhere. That's another one of those things that echoes across the planet, is the serpent. It echoes in South America. We've got the rainbow serpent down here. There's these ancient myths and legends, and they all involve a big snake. And that's not just here. That's everywhere. That is all indigenous, a lot of indigenous cultures have serpent mythology, insofar, like it echoes. And it's an interesting one, that.
Yeah, I do wonder is there a lunar aspect? When you see a crescent moon and you
Hmm.
see it's almost like one end is trying to reach around and grab or
Yeah, that's
especially
true.
during an
Yeah,
eclipse,
especially during
especially
an
in an
eclipse.
eclipse.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like one end is trying to grab the other one. So they saw the eclipse as the recreation of, in some ways, of the world. World's
Mm.
being born again in an eclipse. So every time at Stonehenge there's an eclipse, or actually every sunrise, what I've noticed at sunrise, the stones are eclipse shaped because they're the shape of the serpent's head. So
Mm.
every sunrise, it's actually shining on the outer part of the Southern Circle. So it's as if it's a crescent moon or an eclipse taking place every single morning at Stonehenge. The world is being recreated and protected by a new creation.
And do you think, and this is more instinctual to me, is this culture, whatever we're talking about, we call it the builder culture, for want of a better term. I think science and spirituality were one. I don't think they were deemed separate. I think because these, they always say it's a temple or it's a fortress or it's a religious thing. What if it's both? Göbekli Tepe reminds me of that. That is, it seems to be a very much a spiritual place, but it's a scientific place as well, because you can't build a place like that without science. And like I said, geology, astronomy, logistics, trigonometry, mathematics, force and weight, like all these basic tenements, basic things that we use every day have to be there. But there is something sacred about these sacred sites as well.
That's right. And I like how you do that too, because you're asking questions that no archaeologist has ever been inquisitive enough to ask. But
Mm.
without asking those questions, no discovery can ever occur. So they always come up with kind of lame solutions for how everything was built. Everything they say about how everything was built, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Some of it's practical.
It doesn't. And look, we're you could mention Baalbek. Baalbek is the one that makes no sense to me whatsoever. I don't know how they did that. I don't understand how they put 1,800 ton stones on top of smaller stones on top of a hill. Now, I'm here to tell you right now that we cannot do that today. Um, and the story is the Romans did it. The Romans were great at recording things. If the Romans could move 1,800 ton stones, they would have did it everywhere. This is the thing too, because they love their monuments. You know what I mean? Like if they had the technology to move the trilithon stones, we would know about it because the Romans would have wrote about it. They would, you know what I mean? Like we have that much Roman literature that we would have known. But if you follow the Roman story, they trekked across the desert to Baalbek and built a temple on top of the trilithon stones as a tribute to Dionysus, the Dionysian mysteries, and those sorts of things. It's like yeah, Dionysus is he's the god of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, pretty much. That's he liked his wine, he liked to party, he liked his music. And the Romans marched across the desert to Baalbek to build a monument to him. Why? Because that's where it was there. Now, how did they know that? You know what I mean? It's like that's not something that you discover. That's something that you were told. If you go here, like you just said before, yeah, America's over there. It's pretty far away. They got hit by a cataclysm a few thousand years ago, so it's not real flash over there at the moment. But you can go there if you want. Like there is a foreknowledge and there is an echo that exists to today that I think we're not seeing. Well, some of us are. We are. You are. I am. However, it runs much deeper.
Exactly. And you know what? There's something similar to Baalbek under some of the Persian cities, such as Persepolis. And people have said, why, like it's built on this huge stone colossal platform.
Hmm.
And people have said, why did the Persians put their capital at Persepolis when Persepolis wasn't on the route to anywhere? It's kind of in the middle of a desert, even in their times.
Hmm.
Why put it there? It must have been sacred to their own gods. And we're talking 600, 500 BC, well before the Romans.
Hmm.
This megalithic stuff was already there.
Yeah, and look, and there's we did an episode on Loomis, the episode you were listening to when I sent you the show. Me and him did an episode on Eridu, which supposedly is the first city, and that is megalithic in nature. But what I find fascinating about Eridu is no one's gone and dug it up. Like there's been no exploration or archaeological exploration at Eridu for 100 years. Now, if that is the first city, I know it's in a touchy environment over in the Middle East. However, surely if that's the supposed first city, there would be detailed archaeological excavations ongoing forever, but they just let it rot in the desert. So it's like, why? Why would you do that? Like, if that is the seed of human civilization, the oldest city that we understand, why don't we know more about it? Like when we dove into that subject with it, oh yeah, we'll do a couple of episodes on Eridu. There is not much. Like you can comb the web for as long as you like. Like you just said before, Charles, what happens is an article goes to an article that refers back to the first article that goes to the third. You know what I mean? Like there's only like 5 or 6 papers to just go round and round and round. It's and that's sort of where you become conspiratorially minded. It's like, why are we not actually truly exploring this? What are we not meant to know about these things? Because if a bloke like me can join the dots, you've done your time, we can start joining these dots. There's echoes here, you know.
Exactly. I mean, I think that the common man does think that archaeologists have covered everything already, and therefore anything we say is going to be wrong. But actually, and I know this from my own research in history, when like exactly like you said, It was the same with me with Robin Hood with the 13th century. We found out there's hardly any, there wasn't even a biography on this King Henry III until about 2 or 3 years ago. He ruled for 60 years in the 13th century. There were no biographies.
Really?
Really.
And
You say? Henry III. Do you know anything about Henry III? He ruled for 60 years
60, that's a long time back then in the
and
Middle
no
Ages. That
biographies.
no biographies of so yeah, right.
The area, the period's hardly been covered by historians. Same with archaeology. Like Eridu, what, 5 papers or 5 books is
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
nothing. It's nothing. And the ruins are just they're just going to literally the desert is eating them as we sit here and have this conversation. It's like again, why would they build the first city there? Was that an echo from another civilization? Like how many times have we actually done this? I think that that episode you listened to, What Are Humans? We opened up a rabbit hole there because it's like, how old are we really? And then if we're really old, then how many times have we gone and actually, got to a level of, and I got actually, it was a little while ago. I had I'm actually going to get in touch with this guy. He interviewed me. It was a postdoc at a university, and he wanted to interview someone about the ancient advanced civilization megalith stuff, and he found me. And I think he was expecting me to go, everything was crystal spaceships. Now, listen, I want crystal spaceships as much as the next guy. That'd be super cool. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's a seafaring civilization that had an understanding of metallurgy and could circumnavigate the planet. That's all we actually need. We don't need any more than that. Um, when we start getting to the bigger megalithic stuff, there's more questions that need to be asked there. However, it's I just wonder whether it's echoes on echoes. Like we may not be, so let's say potentially we are the survivors of the big cataclysm 13,000 years ago. They then passed on agriculture and everything else like that to the Turkish, because that's where agriculture pops up at 11,600 years ago in the region of Göbekli Tepe, supposedly. Um, but then something else happens and then they pass it on. And maybe it's these monks, as you say, this religion of monks that travel the world in boats with no sails that give everybody the information to survive. Like it's how else could it seems that seems to be the answer in one form or another.
Yeah, it's a very deep puzzle. With that monasticism, people say, and if you look it up online, it says, oh, the monasteries appeared with Christianity. Show me in the Bible where it talks about monks and Jesus telling people to form monasteries. They were already that we know they were already
They were
there
already
in
there.
Israel
Yeah.
in Jesus's time.
Mm. And I think so much was already there. I think if you talk about, we sort of mentioned ley lines and stuff earlier. There's a series of megalithic temples that actually are off axis, right? So you've got the north, south, east, west ones, and there's a series of them. I think through Cambodia, I can't remember now, but there's a series of them that the axis is off, and do you know how much the axis is off? It's off by the axis of the planet, right? So does that mean that they were built when the planet was standing upright? There's an interesting question. So then, how long ago was that? Like what are we actually talking about now? And it's just a question. I'm not saying that we know. I'm not saying that like it. But if everything else lines up north, the current ones line up north, south, east, west, and then there's a set of them that would line up north, south, east, west if the planet was vertical and not off its axis. Did they exist before the planet was off its axis?
It might have been telling us, we know about the axis knowledge. Here's the planet with the axis, without the axis.
That's true too. That's true too. Absolutely. Maybe we're gonna build this one in the yeah. Well, hey, there you go. That's interesting. I like this. Yeah, we're vibing, Charles, because that's true. Maybe they built it off axis to show that they knew the degree of how the planet was actually at how many degrees it was off its axis. That's
Yeah, I
fascinating.
find a lot of this megalithic culture wanted to venerate the earth. like I mentioned before with the pyramid, Stonehenge. So you might see bits of the earth in every temple around the
Mm,
world, every megalithic structure.
mm.
Earth worship.
Earth worship, yeah, yeah. And so earth worship is interesting. Have you looked into the triptych stuff, the triptych echoes in the cathedrals and stuff like that? So basically, the symbolism and the masons put in all the grand cathedrals and all that sort of stuff. The feminine on the left, the masculine on the right, and in a modern church, it's Jesus hanging in the middle. But the real thing is it's us hanging in the middle. We are the balance. We are the dark. We are the light. We have to maintain that balance of self. And there's just the things that they put into the architecture, the echoes, the flowers of life, the frequencies, the all these things. If you start digging into these cathedrals, number one, again, how did they build those? Really? I mean, even in Melbourne, there's some cathedrals in Melbourne that you go up there and go, they built it in the 1800s. Okay, start digging into that. All right, cool. So the total population of Australia in the 1800s was in the hundreds of thousands of people, total, the whole country. But they had time to build those massive cathedrals in Melbourne and Sydney, and there's some up here in Brisbane. Really? And they did it with horse and cart, with stone that came from across the ocean. You know what I mean? Like, it's not lining up for me. Now, again, I'm not saying it's crystal spaceships, but I'm posing a question. Like because it's quite amazing that how they did that.
It is amazing. Some people have suggested to me that did Australia have an unusual amount of stone workers and bridge workers or something like that in the early days? Because we seem to have, like, Melbourne is only from 1835, and
Mm-hmm.
then by 1850s and 60s, we already have very big, well-built churches.
Massive churches, yeah, in 20 years, yeah, yeah. Not rivaling like Notre Dame or anything else like that, but some of those cathedrals in Melbourne are unbelievable. They're amazing. Yeah.
They're incredible, especially St. Patrick's. When I looked at St. Patrick's, I thought this is very much like a European or continental European, because the Irish, they're a bit Byzantine, and it's
Mm,
almost like a continental European cathedral. I think it's our greatest one in Melbourne, and it's
mm. Yeah, St. Patrick's, that's the one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and
Unreal.
there's and I think there's a whole lost science as well of the mathematics and intricacies and alignments of what's going on with all the different windows, the stations of the cross
Mm-hmm.
pointing to
Yeah.
whatever constellations in the sky. And no one knows anything about this. I think it's lost knowledge that was
Mm,
kept by the builders, and it might be in the Melbourne ones as well.
mm-hmm.
And and we don't know anything about this. I don't think these things were done arbitrarily. A lot of money and effort and skill was put into all this. They would have planned the alignments perfectly according to some plan. And we're not privy to any of this, whether it's Masons or whomever. Maybe that was what their job was all about, sanctifying the land by creating all these alignments to their gods or whoever they were, great architect, you
Yeah,
know.
the great architect in the sky. My research suggests that the Templars might have had something to do with it. That's what my research suggests. Because I found, I'll send you some photos in Warwick, which is like 3 hours, 4 hours west of Brisbane, nowhere. There is a massive Masonic temple and there is a massive church built out of sand colored brick. And in the windows, and you can't see it. Like if you're up close, it just looks like a stained glass window. I was driving past and I went, hang on a minute. It's the there's the three knights of the Templar with their shields in the windows in Warwick, in Queensland, in the middle of nowhere. And again, that was supposedly built in the 1800s. Now, there is echoes of polygonal masonry surrounding a church in Gympie. I could send you some photos of that. Very interesting. One of the theories that I had was when the Templars were run out of Europe in the late 1700s, did they come here? And the Templars are the Masons, are the Dionysian architects, are the architects from Tyre, are the. You know what I mean?
They are. And here's another thing, right? Um, Temples. Did the Templars go around building temples? Look at another sand-colored Templar building, and yes, the Aussie country churches are absolutely enormous compared to
Massive. Yeah.
their congregations.
Yeah.
They would have
Unbelievable.
been.
Yeah.
But yeah, Temple Church in London, when I was there, circular shape, interesting graveyard outside. It's sand colored, like the one you mentioned.
Hmm.
And I thought that when I was there, I thought there is so much mathematics, and a huge circular area, almost Stonehenge-like pillars, strange faces, grotesques on the walls. What's
Hmm.
going on? Is this a map of the heavens somehow?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
thought you could spend a lifetime trying to decipher what they knew and all their books that have been burned and destroyed. And what
Yeah.
are they trying to do with these strange churches?
Mm.
Another thing, getting back to the one in Australia, there's only a limited number of freshwater rivers in Australia. So
That's
every
exactly right.
civilization that comes here, yeah, they're going to leave building materials behind. It's going to be reused.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the whole point. Like, and it was a good I wish I could give credit to the reel that I saw, but it was like I think they were using Sydney, and it's like the churches in Sydney. And it's like, well, if you go to the Australian Register in Australia in 1820, there was only 40,000, whatever the number was, 40,000, 50,000 people total in Australia. That's it, right? Obviously not counting Indigenous, but of the European census that was taken at the time, which they had a good record of because most of them were prisoners. There's only like 40, 50,000 people, and they're building these unbelievably intricate, amazing structures using techniques, like you said, straight out of Gothic Europe. And it's like, how, why, you know, the Dutch things, and you talk about Australia, there's echoes of Dutch architecture in Sydney. Obviously we know the story goes the Dutch found Australia first. Did they settle Australia first? That's a that's an interesting question as well. How much of our history do we not even begin to understand?
Exactly. Do you know the story about Latrobe and the Keys in Geelong?
Tell me. Tell me.
So Governor Latrobe, the first governor of Victoria, famous for wearing a hat and feathers and being very proud of himself, he was visiting Geelong one day with the lime workers. There's a cliff there, and it's actually near a freshwater spring on the beach. And he was presented with a set of keys that one of the European-looking keys that one of the workers had just dug up, and they reckoned it must be centuries old. And it's close to obviously Geelong's freshwater river, and that you
Hmm.
have a spring nearby. And there are some brick kilns there in the cliffs. And I was examining some of them, very old colonial bricks. And I was thinking, might these bricks even be from earlier European civilizations like the Spanish, the
Hmm.
Portuguese? Marco Polo mentioned a country called Greater Java. And he said it was full of gold. Now, this might be Borneo or
Hmm.
it might be Australia. According to a Frenchman, it's Australia. So they knew about this country full of gold.
Hmm.
The Spanish and Portuguese and possibly Dutch looked for some of this gold and built some settlements here. It
Hmm.
may have been top secret, so we'll never know. Especially with the Lisbon earthquake in the 1700s, it wiped out their Casa Indica, which is the case studies of India and the Indies and the East.
Hmm.
We don't know.
No, we don't. And I think I tell you, like we were the last. So unlocking the code was the last field team on the ground at Jakikundu with the supposed Gympie pyramid, right? Now it's not a pyramid; it's a pyramidal shaped ridge that from a certain angle definitely is pyramidal shaped, and it looked like a step pyramid, if anything else. Now that the story goes is that's where the polygonal wall came from, right? Was from that site. I don't. We won't go into that tonight, but I don't buy into that. I'm happy to have a longer discussion about that another time. Polygonal masonry, step pyramids, South America. You know what I mean? And then it's like, then we go, okay, we know that the Indigenous made it to South America because not only do the Australian Indigenous exist inland of South America, not just at the tip, they still have like jamborees, old school Aussie jamborees in tribes in South America to today. And the bloodlines are over there as well. So it's like, what are we talking about? Because again, you go to who loves gold? Well, South Americans love gold. The Spanish love gold. You know what I mean? Like, and then you can go to the boomerangs that are found in the tombs of the pharaohs, and they are known as the foreign weapon. That's what they call them. And they're boomerangs. And he comes to the thought that I had last night, Charles, that I think you'll find fascinating. Where did the ibis come from? You know, the old bin chicken? Well, that's a sacred bird of Egypt. Look up the Egyptian ibis and then look at the Australian ibis. They look the same to me. They say that they're not, but let's say you had someone visiting Australia to learn from the Indigenous, potentially to go to Australia's Stonehenge to understand some great mysteries. And the Egyptians talk, again, like so many other ancient cultures, we go again, talk about a great land to the south, right? Maybe giving some ibises to the Egyptians, these are a sacred bird and they're not bad to eat. You know what I mean?
That's a
So,
really good point. There's another one. It gets even worse. You know the god Seth.
mhm.
What animal is it? Some have suggested it's a kangaroo,
Is it a kangaroo? Oh,
or they say it's a dog or it's a kangaroo, but it's not really a dog.
it's not really
It's
a
not
dog.
satisfying. Yeah, some have suggested it's a kangaroo. I can't
That
remember the author back in the 60s.
I'm not joking. That gave me chills, man.
Yeah.
That just gave me chills because that it looks a lot more like a kangaroo, doesn't it? If you think about it. Ooh.
And he's the god of death, maybe because Australia's in the underworld.
Uh-huh. There you go. There you go. Yeah, look, I'll share some of our stuff. We've made some of our own discoveries here in Southeast Queensland that I'll share with you offline. That I'd be very curious for you to have a look at. We found Palladian alignments. We found this thing that we call the imprint, and yeah, we found there's a site up here that, again, it's on neutral ground, right? So it's on neutral ground. It was a meeting place for everybody for as long as anyone can remember, and there's these little echoes on this big sandstone plateau, and it's crazy. And they are the echo of who, what, where. I think, look, I firmly believe that there's still standing stone circles outside Mullumbimby. We just haven't found them yet. I think they're buried in the bush out there. I do believe that.
Hope
You know,
so.
we just need a lidar drone. I just keep saying that because they're $12,000. We need a $12,000 lidar drone, and we'll find it. You know what I mean? Send it up, put it in a grid pattern. We'll find it. When I was down at Mullumbimby with Richard and we went to the Stonehenge site, we saw all the standing stones and the spiral stones and the stuff that's just everywhere around there. It's I think they're there. I think there's still some there, and there's definitely echoes and stories from old locals about them pushing over stone circles over and over and over again. And what's fascinating too is that the indigenous legend with Mullumbimby is they traded crystal, right? Because the indigenous didn't really care about gold. They didn't really care about they like crystal though, and they traded crystal. The story goes is that Mullumbimby was a crystal trading ground. Now I don't know if you've been to Mullumbimby. You know what's there? The Crystal Castle. It's one of the
Wow.
biggest, some of the biggest crystals in the world are in Mullumbimby at the Crystal Castle. Cool place, very cool place. They've got an amethyst cave that's almost as big as this studio. Like you can sit in it. It's unreal. Um, Again, is that an echo? Right? Do they trade the biggest crystals out of Mullumbimby because they've always traded the biggest crystals from Mullumbimby? You know what I mean? Like, I might be stretching with that one, but you know what I mean? Like, there's these. That's maybe not a solid data point, but it's still a data point. Like there's still an echo there for sure. Um, See what we've done? We're already over an hour and a half in. I told you we weren't. It was going to be easy. we have, we haven't even started. We haven't even started. You made a point in your bio about the fertility. You believe that the ancient megalith stuff was part of a fertility religion or spirituality practice, and that has been left behind. Now, one of the part of the triptych is the feminine, the masculine, and then we are God in the middle. one of the big problems that we have that I see in modern society is we've lost our reverence for the sacred feminine. And therefore that there's a big reason for that. And that's one of the big reasons that we are out of balance as a species of human. And I was curious as to what led to that. Where speak to me about that.
I read Maria Gimbutas. She was a Baltic ethnographer and anthropologist, and she started analyzing, especially the Balkans, remnants of figurines and so forth from the Balkans from 5000 BC, Vinca culture, and she started coming up with different gods they had. One of them is a staff god. It's got four faces, and I thought, well, that's a similar to a pyramid facing in four different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And she really went on a lot about the triple goddess.
Yep.
And the triple goddess or the hunting goddess or whatever she's called. And the triple,
Artemis in the Greek culture. Yeah.
yeah, and she showed a map of old Europe, what she considered to be old Europe, where they worshipped this triple goddess, and she thought later this was all overthrown by the more masculine gods the Indo-Europeans coming in, replacing the old Europeans. But anyway, she showed a map, and guess what? Egypt is inside old Europe, the Delta area. She considers that to be the old European culture also
Really? That's
from her
interesting.
work. Yeah. In other words, I thought, well, let's apply the triple goddess to the pyramids. Three pyramids, there's your triple goddess. And of course, and she said another thing as well, which I related to the pyramid religion. She said this culture ended in old Europe in 2000 BC, and that is when they stopped building pyramids in Egypt.
Is there a cataclysm that coincides with that 2000 BC that we don't understand or maybe we don't have knowledge of? Do you think?
There is because there's okay. I believe someone mentioned something happening in Austria. There was some meteor or something hitting, or a comet
Mm,
or something hitting around that time. There was the Sumerian civilization ended around 2000 BC in
mm,
Mesopotamia. There was a catastrophe. The Old Kingdom ended around 2000 BC, and it was replaced by somewhat a darker people. I think they're similar to they might be Indians who came in, and the Montuhotep and all that. The Middle Kingdom, a very different culture.
mm,
And but here's the thing: it was said Khufu or Surid or whoever he was that built the Great Pyramid, according to the Arabs, he knew that a cataclysm was coming. He had to
mhm,
build the pyramids first. So he's
mhm.
part of this legend developed in retrospect of this cataclysm having occurred, and
Well,
therefore,
that is the story, isn't it? You know, and
yeah.
this is you talk about echoes. That is one of the greatest echoes because every indigenous culture, right through to our indigenous culture, the indigenous Australians, the oldest supposed, the oldest recorded culture on the planet, their oldest legend is what? Big flood coming, got to get to the hills. You know what I mean? Like that is just echoes and echoes and echoes throughout Asia, throughout America, through every single culture. That is the story. The flood is coming. There's a big cataclysm coming. We must survive. That is the never ending story. It's so fascinating. So they reckon Austria. They reckon something hit in Austria and potentially.
Yeah, I heard something like that.
Mm.
Not quite, but I tried to find more information. I couldn't. Maybe someone knows something.
Yeah, maybe someone does know something, or maybe we're not allowed to know something, because I there does seem to be these points, doesn't there? Like it's like okay, Sumerians end here, da 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 da. I mean, where do you sit with we you open the door on the Sumerians? Where do you sit with the Sumerians? I mean, you talk about giants, so those Sumerians glyphs like that looks like humans underneath and big dude holding a lion. You know what I mean? Like that's and I'm not saying that's literal. I mean, it could be, the modern narrative is that they worshipping a god, obviously. Where do you, and because this talk about, you love your astronomy, the Sumerians knew more about the stars. They knew Pluto was there before we did.
Well, it's such a little studied people. I saw that the Sumerians, from what have read, the Sumerians are very similar to the Marsh Arabs, who are their remnants, who live on reed huts on little floating islands because they're possibly worried about a flood
A
coming
flood
back or
coming.
something.
Yeah, yeah.
And well, apparently they're a light-featured people. They could be from the north. They could be from somewhere in Europe. The thing is that the Sumerian culture itself was drastically changed. I'm not sure if you're aware the Mesopotamian region where it pours into the Persian Gulf, and there's not
Mm.
much information about this, was radically changed after and during the Sumerian period. A whole lot of silt came down from the mountains, and maybe tens or hundreds of kilometers of new land were created. So, some drastic flood. Yeah,
So something's happened
it's
there, isn't it? There's a
something's happened.
something
The
there. There's
land
a cataclysm. Yeah.
the land around the Persian Gulf has changed radically since ancient times. I believe new land was formed. So cities like Ur and all that, they used to be coastal, and
Mm.
now they're deeply inland.
Mm.
And
Eh,
things like that aren't supposed to happen.
No. So is that that's an evidence of a cataclysm, but not, like it's like something happened, but yeah, all this land was formed. I mean, it makes me wonder as well, like, if we keep getting reset, how often do we actually get to the point where we write things down and record things? Like, one of the rabbit holes I fell down with the what are humans thing is that the sequence of events that takes place in order for a fossil to form is just miracle upon miracle. Even to get to the point where we find it is just a miracle upon a miracle upon a miracle. We have no idea like what has actually truly come before us.
It's exactly true. And it's funny, we're only looking for hominids in Africa because Darwin and others they only suggested that we might be from the great apes because they're still living there. But all
Mm,
the red hair and the blonde hair, this all comes from Asian monkeys. We're not
mm.
looking there at all.
Don't get me started on Darwin. You want to talk about a theory built on a bed of sand? That is the theory built on a bed of sand. And the only reason Darwin's theory prevailed is he knew the aristocracy and it won out over many other theories. Like yeah. And there's so many of those things that well, not me and you, but that the greater people just assume to be true. I think, and it's, oh yeah, we know. No, we don't. No, we don't. It's like, especially in Australia, no one has walked all the land in northern New South Wales. No one has walked all the land in southeast Queensland. No one has seen what is actually buried in the bush in the Blue Mountains. And not everyone. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way that has actually happened. It's physically impossible that anyone has actually done that. So we don't even know what's deep in the outback or deep in the bush. We don't know because no one's done it. And every turn of the spade has the potential to change history, doesn't it? Well, mate, I feel that we're coming to the end of our first episode. Uh, this isn't going to be our last, Charles. You're coming back because we got 400 other things to talk about. You didn't get so it was just the triple goddess stuff that led you down the fertility cult, or was there more echoes with that, or before we move on from there?
Well, I've since found a lot more about that, but I was relying mainly back in 2015 with that book, In Search of the Origin of Pyramids, and I have ordered more copies, so I'm happy to send you one of those as well.
Oh, appreciate
Uh,
that, mate.
It's I was relying on her research to show, look, there's three pyramids. We worship a trinity from even before Christian times.
Hmm.
They've tried to fit the Christian religion into the earlier trinity.
Absolutely,
There
yep.
were also trinities of angels. Maybe there were three Marys as well.
Mm.
So, and we see the three pyramids at Egypt. So this shows that, and there's always been two theories about the pyramids in Egypt. Were they built one by one with each generation, or was there a unified plan? And the people who study the geometry of Giza, they always say, look, this was built to a singular unified
Yeah, there
plan.
was a plan. Absolutely, yeah. I would almost even say the Nile Delta. If you look at it from overhead, not only does it mirror the Milky Way, but it was built. That whole section was built from an individual plan, I think. That's what makes sense to me.
Delta is very interesting. It's interesting. I just bought a copy of Diodorus. Never had a copy before. I've got this a Loeb edition, right?
Mhm.
And he was writing that the Egyptians hold that mankind began in Egypt.
Really?
So so I'm thinking there must be a tremendous history of mankind just in Egypt alone.
You would think so. You would think so. I mean, it's one of those ones that, look, I need to get there and see. Oh, well, let's cover off a couple of big questions before we finish up for tonight. What do you think the pyramids are for? What do you think they are?
Uh, it's a representation of the northern hemisphere of the planet. It's a hemisphere. The reason they build them square, I believe, is partly because they were venerating the four compass quadrants, but also because the bricks are square. Because
Mm,
in Europe, they built round mounds, which I
mm,
believe are the same thing, and they just used soil, so they made them circular, like the Earth.
mm.
Stonehenge, I believe, also maps the Earth, so it's at least venerates the size of the Earth, so it's round. Um,
But do they have a function? I mean, because anyone that I know that's been there that I've talked to about it says they feel like they're a machine or something. There's a function to them, and it's not a tomb, obviously, but the three big ones anyway. But if they're not tombs, what are they? What
it's
do
a
you
good
what?
point because yeah, the vast scale of the Giza pyramids, and even the pyramids everywhere you look, they're on a vast epic scale
Mhm.
that defies comprehension because they're so much bigger than the cathedrals we build.
And they've found. I heard tell. I haven't picked up any more, but there's tell of even bigger pyramids being found in South America again as well that make Teotihuacan look small. Which is
I think
imagine
I
that.
suggested, yeah, I believe I suggested in my pyramid book from memory that they were creating a home for the fallen god, the fallen angel, which is inside the earth. So they had to be very big because there was literally a god living inside. Um, so it had to be on this scale. But of course, that leaves so many other questions for people who are inquisitive. That leaves so many other questions unanswered, like why the machine-like quality of them, why the truly epic scale.
Hmm. I mean,
It's still
and
unnecessary.
it is unnecessary. This is the whole point. And then, you've got the pools of mercury that have been found beneath South American pyramids. Now, mercury is a naturally forming thing, but not to get a whole pool of it in a stone. Like there's, massive in megalithic built pools, and it's full of mercury in the bottom of these pyramids. It's like, well, what is that for? Right? There's the water, the constant battle for in the water table in Egypt that they found water in the bottom of these pyramids as well. And that's the thing too. That, like you talk about the Great Pyramid, yeah, sure. There's this massive thing above the ground, but if you go beneath it, it extends beneath the ground as well. And it's like th- there has to be a function. It's not just it's not just some grand spiritual project. I think
Yeah.
you know, I just don't. I don't buy that. There's got to be there's got to be original function.
Well,
And I
I've come up with you're right. I've come up with some etymologies of pyramid. I believe it's a European word, so it's a barrow with a moat. Barrow moat, pyramid. We look at Peru mountains. We look at barrows in England. It means burrowed in the ground.
burrowed in the ground with
People,
water, with the moat. His
yeah,
moat's water.
the mid at the end. It means mother, or it means moated, or it
Mm,
means mound,
hmm.
because all mounds had a moat.
Yeah,
You look at mounds in England, or even Glastonbury or Silbury. Silbury Hill has a moat around it. It's a pyramid with
really.
a moat. Same in Egypt. Yes, the pyramids in Egypt, they were supposed to be in the middle of water, right? They're a
Hmm.
moated
Hmm.
barrow or whatever it is. I believe it means mountain in European, pira, or pile
Oh
basically,
yeah,
very similar to
Paul.
the word
Yeah.
pile in English.
Mm,
Uh, so for some reason, it's supposed to be, I believe it's supposed to be Genesis. At Genesis, the God is coming and shining on the deep waters,
hmm.
and the pyramids are shiny. They're white. They were all white colored. Even
Mm.
Newgrange, there was a white facade.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
redoing Genesis to recreate the world for some reason, as if to protect, to make sure the world does recreate if there's a catastrophe. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, there's definitely the echoes are definitely written in there. I do wonder about that. One of the so here's a bit of a left wing. Here's a bit of a left brain thought that I had because these monuments are amazing, right? You got the Great Pyramids. You got about the one in Cambodia that's built on the swamp, which defies logic. Um, all these massive megalithic sites, the big ones. Think about the big ones, especially the ones that line up with ley lines and all those sorts of things. Think about all the big ones that line up with ley lines across the planet. Um, let's pretend for a second that they have again this culture that we're talking about, the builder culture. Science and spirituality were one; they weren't separate. If that is true, what is the true science behind these monuments, behind these sites? And what I think is missing, let's pretend they are some sort of machine, for want of a better term. They serve a physical purpose as well as a scientific purpose. Then what is missing from all of them is whatever powers them. The power crystal. We'll get a bit weird towards the end here, right? The whatever actually make because again, and I'm more talking about the ones on the ley lines because if they're picking up on the magnetic energy of the Earth, right? We can't we're getting towards the end of our time tonight, but we started talking about offline electromagnetic anti-gravitic propulsion, right? So let's pretend for a second that the way that you move a 2,000-ton stone is you float it using magnetism, okay, in some form or another. Now, I know that sounds a little crazy, but tell me how else they did it.
Well, I believe it's not crazy at all because the Arab legends talk about this. They say something was tapped with a stick and the stones floated around. Magic
Oh,
carpet.
yeah.
So, and we don't know the ultimate origin of the stones. We don't know that the same people who built the pyramid actually quarried the stones. We don't know if the sto I actually, based on my reading of Herodotus, I believe these Old Kingdom Egyptians cut up bigger stones because Herodotus talks about. I think he says there are 30-foot stones on the site, and I don't know of any or 30-meter or 30-foot stones on the site that made up an earlier monument he called the Causeway. Then it's not the same as the existing causeways from the pyramids. It was a different monument
Hmm.
with carvings of animals, Göbekli Tepe style, much older.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
believe they recycled much of this into the pyramids. So there was already so much there. Um, and as for the machine idea, it's interesting because the Arabs said the Egyptians put all the science, all of the world's science, into the pyramid. So why not a machine aspect as well? Something to do with the area or what's underneath. Maybe saying geo
Well,
related, something related to
let
the Earth,
let let me
Earth's power.
let me continue a thought process that I've had that is in one of my notebooks somewhere. So the Jewish, slaves of Egypt, and they run and they get chased across the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, or so goes the story, right? Now, would you seriously chase your slaves across the desert for 40 days and 40 nights if they were just slaves? No, they took something with them, didn't they? Do you remember what they took with them? The
No.
ark,
Oh,
the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I looked into this, talking about measurements and cubits and all that sort of stuff. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber would fit the Ark of the Covenant. What if, and again, we're finishing on a weirder note, what if the Ark of the Covenant powers the Great Pyramid? Because if you look into the Ark, we did that one as well. Go back in the back catalogue. Me and Loomis did the Ark as well. The Ark is fascinating. It's a weapon. It's in fact, I know it's a weird thing, but the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones, is the best depiction of what happens at the end to the Nazis. Is one of the best depictions from the biblical texts and from all the ancient texts. Is what happened if you opened the Ark. lights would come out, lightning would rain down from the sky. It was used as a weapon of war. There was said to be there wasn't just one ark, there's five that exist around the planet. What if the ark is an echo of a piece of ancient technology?
Probably. I think it could be echoes of ancient nuclear power. Like
Mm.
I've discussed it. It feels weird to me.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we have to think it only feels weird because we haven't experienced it, but we know these sciences are accurate, and
Mm.
ancient humans were just as smart as us. And we know that humans can achieve a high population very quickly in
Hmm.
only several generations. And with a
Mm.
high population comes economics and science.
Yeah,
Why not before? And it's been wiped
explosion.
out.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
these are
Why not
memories
before?
of the
Yeah.
ancient, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
memories.
I mean, we haven't, you mentioned the Indians a little bit earlier. We looked into, it was a couple of years ago now, the Vimana Shastra, some of the texts on Vimana, it's getting late, isn't it? The Vimana, you know what I'm trying to say. The texts on the Vimana, and there's one of the texts that survived about the Vimana, mate, it reads like a flight manual.
Yep.
It reads like, because I was in, I used to do engineering on mining oil and gas. I'm a mechanically minded person. I've got a manual for my Pajero, and when we read it, it read like the book that you give a pilot to understand how to fly his machine. And it's like all this stuff is said to be um, myth or legend. What if it's not? Some of those gold look like little flying machines that have been found in South America and throughout Egypt, and all these little weird little trinkets, these little out of place artifacts they keep finding. It only took us 200 years, Charles, to go from horseback to rockets.
Yep.
You know, let's just pretend that let's leave it alone. Let's full stop it at 70,000 years, because that's when we got reduced to 5-10,000 people. Okay. Let's pretend for a second then from 70,000 to 13,000 is a semi stable period with localized cataclysms as opposed to global cataclysms. What are we going to achieve in 55,000 years before the next global cataclysm? If we went from horseback to rockets or to nuclear technology in under 150, like,
Exactly. And memories of the past, unless it's some form of telepathy, memories from the past of high technology are the only way to explain these legends.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, I like the term genetic echoes, right? I think so. I imagine you might feel this as well. Me doing this podcast and talking about these mysteries, it's what drives me, Charles, right? And it's not a question. It's not a question as to whether or not I do this. Like I've been, the podcast recently turned 8, and over those 8 years, I've put it down for 6 months at a time. Oh no, I'm just gonna. I don't want to do the show anymore. I don't really need to do it. But do you think the research has stopped? No, it hasn't. Research never stops. The studying never stops. You know what I mean? It doesn't. And I don't have a choice, Charles. You know what I mean? Like I have to continue to dig. And it's like, well, why? Why am I obsessed with this ancient advanced civilization? I think it's an echo. I think it's a genetic echo. I think that, once upon a time in a land far, far away, that's who I was. Or I was part of that. And I don't know how else to explain it apart from that.
I feel the same way. And also, your brain is keeps reaching the same conclusion on a daily basis based on everything you've read is the only way to make sense of it and to explain it.
Yeah.
Because we're
Yeah.
problem solvers.
Yeah, exactly. The thing about it logically, it's like, okay, there was an advanced civilization that came before us that has shared its knowledge and embedded it in these megalithic societies. Do you think, I didn't ask this before, with your astronomy stuff, because this is another thing that I've looked into, or not looked into, but come to a conclusion about, because it's like, why? Why are they watching the stars? Why are they doing that? Do you think they're mapping cataclysm? Do you think they're mapping the next time it comes around?
Yes,
Is
the
it a
Mayan
cyclical
calendar, for
thing?
example, that's a cataclysm map.
Mm,
And what happened in 2020 or 20, one Frenchman says the Mayan calendar actually ends in 2020, not 2012, and
mm,
therefore it's based on Jupiter and Saturn coming together. And
mhm.
I've proposed a theory for how this cataclysm might occur because we are having tons of planetary lineups for the past 5 years
Oh
after
yeah.
2020.
Hmm.
That allows that
Meteorites to
allows
come through. Yeah.
meteorites to come through on the other side.
Yeah.
And that is
Absolutely.
at the end of the calendar. So that might have happened before. Hence,
Mm,
they created this calendar to let people know when it's going to happen again.
mm. And I
And the
believe
millennium, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I believe the Mayan calendar, after we didn't, I think we got through 2012 okay, I'm pretty sure. It was looked at by astronomers, anthropologists, and archaeoastronomers. But I think the overarching message of the Mayan calendar, the one that I heard was I think it's like a window, like it's like a 1 degree window of the equinox. So like it finishes between 1960 and 2040, and the message is look to the sky in your times, right? Then if you take Göbekli Tepe, enclosure D, pillar 43, you take Sid Rix's work and Martin Sweatman and Sid Rix's paper, that pillar 43 is measuring the cataclysm, and the stars that are on pillar 43, if they didn't have a big roof over Göbekli Tepe, you looked above, it's pretty much the stars that are on that pillar that are above that pillar right now. Right? Same thing. Look to the sky in your times. Right. And I think one of the things we don't do, Charles, is we don't look to the sky in our time. I think it was only, it was this year that a bus size asteroid went between us and the moon, closer to us than the moon, and we didn't see it. We didn't see it until it went past. Now, if that made it through, if that say let's say that's made of iron or a dense material, and that hit anywhere on the planet that's populated, game over. Localized cataclysm. Any major city, any major continent, gone. Like and we don't understand that. I think we've lost sight of that. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons we chase this stuff, Charles. Trying to bring that back into the consciousness.
It's true. It's true. It's there for me as well. Like I'm also driven by the fact that I know these ancestors were very skilled and wise
Hmm.
people. So I want to just honor them somehow to show what they were capable of and to show people,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that drives me about this stuff is that what I see is this global culture, and it was truly global. And then in these fractured times, Charles, I think there's a measure of control to be had. But if we could show people that for however many thousands of years there existed a global culture where color, creed, religion didn't nothing mattered apart from looking after the earth, looking after the planet, and looking after each other, and devoting our lives to this scientific spirituality process through stone, and it echoes across the globe. That is like concrete proof that we can get along. You know what I mean? Like it's like it is. That's if we choose to, and we can pull together as a species. And I do feel that as well. And I think yeah, it's yeah, it's cool stuff. It's cool stuff. So what did you your first show with us, mate? Thank you very much, Charles. This is everything I thought it would be, mate. Thank you very much. And we haven't even started. I've got 400,000 more questions and theories to throw at you and things to share with you. So um, you're welcome back, and I want you to come back. But I'll give you, what do you want to finish, mate? Have you got any questions for me? Do you want to finish on a different topic? Is there anything that we haven't spoken about? Did we take too many right turns and you didn't get to say something that you wanted to say? What do you think?
Well, thanks for having me, mate. I'd love to come back. It was absolutely amazing. I loved
Yeah.
it. You're a very
Yeah.
clever man. Because you see everything that's going on with with the data that we have.
Hmm.
in 2025, all this new data that the internet's given us, the megalithic culture unites it all. Um, it's, when did you become aware? I'd like to know about this whole big picture, because the reason we've taken so many right turns is this is a whole world we're talking about,
Yes, there's
of
so
thousands
many.
of years.
Yeah, and it joins. Yeah, that's why there's so many right turns, because one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and it's all joined together. Um, when did I become aware? Well, I've always been a weirdo, right? Like I said, you weren't the only one pouring through encyclopedias as a 10, 11 year old thinking that was good fun, because that was me too. Uh, however, I think with age comes maturity, and I think with maturity comes wisdom in some form or another. And like I said before, I'm doing like I have no need to do a minute reels on TikTok. I have no need to do all the things that would make me a social media starlet. I have no need or no interest even to do that. Right. So that's not what I'm doing this for. I'm doing this because I have to. And it's, I inadvertently through this show, and it's like all the stuff, like the Rosetta Stone, all the things that you see here. There's a whole nother shelf and all my books that I haven't bought into the new studio yet. I didn't buy all this stuff for the show, Charles. I bought that. It's just my stuff, like it's just how it is. But I think having the ability to do this show revealed the picture to me, I think. um, and talking to people like yourself, and exploring ideas and finding like-minded people, and not feeling like I was alone. I thought I was the only weirdo that did all this stuff. Turns out that's not true. Turns out there's lots of us, right? We just got to find each other and share. But I think the global side of this thing, it came to me about, it was a couple of years into doing the show, because I'd had the pyramid stuff. I've got like megalithic pyramid books that I've had since I was 11 that I still carry with me today. And when I started to see the echoes of polygonal masonry, of actually, here's some, I don't know if you've seen this before. Did you know that some of the Roman aqueducts are built on polygonal masonry? And the Romans say that that was there before. They didn't do that. They built their aqueducts on polygonal masonry blocks, and then they tried to replicate it. Why? Because polygonal masonry is earthquake resistant, right? That's the.
Success of the Romans,
Mhm.
thanks to their ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I think it was probably about I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago that I started to see the picture develop, and then I went, oh, hang on a minute. And then it was the triptych. To be honest, the triptych research that's done, Richard Casaro is the guy who did the triptych research, and he fell off the planet during COVID. I don't know what happened to him. If you go to his website, he hasn't put anything on his website for 4 years, 5 years, and he's gone. I don't know what happened to him. I've got one of his books on PDF that I bought off him. I tried to order a couple more, but they never turned up. But postage and stuff was weird during COVID, so um, but he disappeared. I haven't heard anything from him for years. However, his triptych research, the masculine, the feminine, and the fact that we are God, and that hit me like a lightning bolt. Because then, as soon as I saw that echo through all the churches. I saw it echo through all the polygonal, through the megaliths. I saw it echo through South America, into Turkey, into everywhere. All right, and it's that overarching religion that you talk about, that that I saw the evidence of, and I went, hang on a minute, this is this is global, and this is total, and it's everybody, regardless of color, creed, religion. Nothing mattered apart from this, and they left markers everywhere for us to understand. um, in different forms. Like again, it's not all pyramids. Some of the stuff through Asia is different as well. Actually, I know my wife went to Bali on a retreat last year, and she took some amazing photos of this temple that's up a mountain in the up 1,000 stairs. That's part of the pilgrimage is to walk up to this massive temple in the jungle. And I was like, well, where did the temple come from? And she's like, well, I knew you were going to ask me that question, so I asked them. And like, oh, I was always been here. You know what I mean? So it's like even the locals say that. Who built the pyramid? The gods built it. You know, but who are they, and who are we? And the eternal question, Charles, why? You know, it's But yeah, it was quite funny. One of the boys coined me the weirdo whisperer, right? And it's like, you know what? I'll take it because that's how I feel. That's what that's what I do. And yeah, this has been fun, man. I want we need to do this again because I've got what's going to happen is we're both going to listen back to this and go, oh, we should have said this, that, and the other. Um, so, oh, hang on, give me 2 seconds. We're going to do something cool. I have yet to bring all my books in here, but what we're going to do is to wrap this up. Do you have anything else, mate, before we wrap?
Oh, not particularly, other than to say it's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. It has been, man. It's been fun. It's been fun. I love how we're bouncing off each other. I think it's really cool. We're gonna do some cool stuff. So what I do, I've got a few books, right? So this one is the Guide for the Advanced Soul. Is this one? That's this one, right? And what we do at the end of our shows is I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to open up a page in this book, and it's going to encapsulate everything that we talked about tonight in a crazy way. Okay. I hope it does now that I've said that. um, the books we normally use are by a martial artist called Dr. Bodie Sanders. I've had him on the show as well. I should reach out to Dr. Bodie. He's a top guy, and he has the like philosophy, warrior philosophy type stuff. But let's see. Let's see. So for those that are listening at home, I've got my eyes closed, don't I, Charles?
You do?
Okay, so the first one I read, expand in consciousness. Be ready to accept anything now at any time. That's by Eileen Caddy. The other one, trials are but lessons that you failed to learn, presented once again. So where you have made a faulty choice before, you can now make a better one and thus escape all pain. That was what you chose before has brought to you. Is that not what we're trying to do? Is it? Yeah.
Yes, slightly uncanny there. A nice
Isn't it? There you
reflection.
go. There you go. Oh, well, mate, thank you very much. We need to sit down again soon, and it's been a pleasure. Until next time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, mate.